When doing a spell, how can you be sure that the spell gets to the right person? How can you make sure that whatever magical energy or entities you're drawing in knows that you want to curse John Smith Jr. and not John Smith Sr.? In other words, how can you totally personalize a spell? Today we are looking at evidence from antiquity where they did this very thing using a technique that is still used today and is frequently referred to as taglocks. If you're at all familiar with modern magical practice, you've probably heard the term taglocks. And the word taglocks means just what it sounds like. It is something that you use to identify a spell with a particular person. Now, we'll get into just what the something is in a minute, but suffice it to say that a taglock is a way to personalize a spell towards its intended target. And I'm using the term target neutrally here because it can be for any type of magic whatsoever. It doesn't have to be curses, it can be positive things. You can even make taglocks for yourself. I should say as I get into this is not meant to be practical advice. Taglocks are not something I use or engage with in my daily life. It is something that I'm talking about purely from an academic perspective and specifically with regards to how these things were used in the ancient world. As I said, taglocks are used in all kinds of spells, not just those intended to do harm, so taglocks themselves are not a negative or harmful or baneful magical object or tool or technique. They are simply neutral and used in all different kinds of spells in antiquity as well as today. Alright, so we have an idea that a taglock is something that you use to personalize a spell towards its intended target. But what actually is a taglock and what can be used as a taglock? The short answer is pretty much anything. Anything that would be reminiscent of the person that you are trying to do the spell for or on is a good object to use as a taglock. Of course, the more personal, the better. The more closely you can personalize an object to the intended target of the spell, the more powerful the magic is supposed to be. The English term taglock seems to have referred to a matted lock of hair, although the evidence for that was a little bit sparse when I was doing the research. I'd love to know if anybody knows more about that. And the theory is that hair is actually one of the strongest forms of taglocks you can use. Why? Because it contains the DNA of the person that you are trying to do the spell on. That's why the most popular and most recommended taglocks you see from antiquity all the way to today are things like hair, fingernails, any kind of bodily fluid that you can imagine, anything that contains the DNA of the person that you're trying to do the spell on, and that includes yourself. Now, if you don't feel like going around and harvesting the snot of your enemies, for which I do not blame you at all, there are other things that you can use as taglocks, again, as personal as possible. Things like jewelry, sentimental objects, even photographs of the person or the person's name can be sometimes used as a taglock. Just anything that directs the spell towards this person. Now, I'm really excited because I actually have a real world example that many of you may have heard of. So if you are around my age, you might know the movie Life Size, starring Tyra Banks and Lindsay Lohan. This movie is about a young girl whose mother has passed away and her father remarries or finds love and there's another woman in her life. She's generally unhappy about this situation. Now, her new stepmom tries to form a relationship with her by giving her this doll. And the girl doesn't really like the doll, she kind of just leaves it, but nevertheless it is in her room. Then one day the girl goes into a bookstore and discovers a book of spells, including a spell that can resurrect a person from the dead. Now, of course, the girl desperately wants to try and bring her mother back from the dead, so she gets the book and brings it home. And the recipe for the spell includes a personal effect of the intended target of the resurrection spell, so her mother. So the girl ends up using her mother's hairbrush to perform the spell. Now the spell works, but what the girl doesn't know is that her stepmother used the hairbrush to brush the doll's hair. So instead of bringing her mother back to life, she actually brings the doll to life, and then chaos ensues, as you can imagine, for the rest of the movie. But the point is that she uses a taglock, and it does actually work, even though it's not in the way that she expected. So you can see, even though the hairbrush belonged to her mother, the hair was the doll's, and the hair won out. And by the way, if anyone was wondering how I devoted my entire life to the study and enjoyment of magic, just look at all of the magical media that I was exposed to at a formative age. So yeah, basically anything can be used as a taglock. Like I said, photographs, a sample of the person's handwriting maybe is a good thing if you have a letter from them or something like that. These are all things that are commonly used as taglocks in modern witchcraft, and as we'll see, taglocks were used in a variety of different ways in antiquity as well. In general, taglocks are a fairly common aspect of magic, both modern and ancient, and especially when you're doing a spell that is item heavy like a witch's bottle or something, these are often included. The main body of evidence that we have for ancient taglock use comes from curse tablets and magical texts like the Greek magical papyri. For those of you who don't know, the Greek magical papyri are a collection of ancient, you could say recipes for spells. Think of it as like a magical manual, although it was not meant to be consumed all in a single volume. The vast majority of them are published in a single volume. I'll leave a link in the description if anybody wants to check that out. A lot of spells in antiquity were written in Greek or in a combination of languages that included Greek, and because of this, the closest word to our English word taglock is the Greek word ousia. Now, strictly speaking, ousia just means stuff. It's a really common word outside of magical contexts. It refers to a person's property, their belongings, and in philosophical contexts, it refers to a person's nature or being or essence or something like that. It's a participle of the verb aimi, which means to be. In a magical context, the word refers to a taglock, something that belongs to the person, either is a part of the person, like hair or something, or just simply that person's belongings that are used in a spell in order to attach the spell to that person. For example, a love spell from the Greek magical papyri goes something like this. You take some wax or some leftover bread dough and you form it into the figurine of a dog. From there, you take the eyes of a bat, which I presume are the actual eyes of an actual bat, and stick them where the eyes of the dog would be in your little figurine. Then you take the ousia of the person that you're trying to cast the love spell on and stick them through the bat eyes, and then the spell goes on from there. Now, I don't really know why a bat or a dog might be involved in this kind of thing. Not really sure. But the operative part for us is the part about the ousia, where you include the ousia of the person in the actual physical magical object that you are creating. Now, I would imagine that you could also include your own ousia if you're trying to do a love spell for another person and yourself. So yeah, in the case of a love spell, you can include ousia for 2 people, 1 person, multiple people, whatever the situation determines, basically. And including the ousia of each person that the spell is supposed to act upon will ensure that the spell will get where it needs to go. Here's a good one. This next spell is supposed to, quote, make virgins run out of their homes, presumably to go to the person doing the love spell on them. I make no promises about this, but this is how this spell goes. You take a papyrus, you draw some magical symbols that are provided in the text. You also write out a written spell and include some magic words as well. And then you take the ousia of the person, And in this case, it says the ousia of the woman that you desire, and you put it up in the papyrus. So just like the first spell that we talked about, you're taking the ousia and including it in the other physical representation of the spell, whatever that is. In this case, it's papyrus. In the last case, it was a figurine with animal parts. So whatever the spell is, the ousia is just like an ingredient in that spell. And just like I've been saying, the point is that the ousia of the woman you desire ends up in the spell, tells the spell where to direct its attention, and then the woman, the virgin that you're desiring, will rush out of her home. Whatever. The last spell from the Greek magical papyri that I'm gonna mention is, you guessed it, a love spell. Awesome. This one's more involved, so I'm actually just going to read from my notes here for a minute, so bear with me. Begin by making 2 figurines out of wax or clay, whatever you got on hand. One of them is supposed to represent Ares holding a sword, which, you can make your own interpretation of that. And the other one is supposed to represent the woman that you're trying to attract. The female figure is where the ousia comes in. You're supposed to put it around her head or her neck. And I'm guessing, like, if you have hair, you could probably attach it to the head to make it look like the figure, like the ousia was the hair of the figurine. Does that make sense? I would guess that you could probably do something like that. So part of the spell, which is in itself really long, but one line of it goes like this. Attract her, and then you write her name, whom so-and-so bore, so you write the name of her mother, and whose magical material you possess. Now, throughout the English translation of the Greek magical papyri by Betts, ousia is regularly translated as magical material, which I think is a perfectly serviceable translation, but just understand that it means taglock in this context. Now, once you're done with it, you're supposed to place it beside the grave of someone who has met an untimely or violent end, along with some flowers. That's a nice touch, I guess. And after a certain point, you're supposed to hold some other ousia, which comes from the tomb, right? So this would be the ousia of the dead person, and recite another prayer. So this is not the same ousia as you attached to the figurine at the beginning. This is the ousia of the dead person. So you're not necessarily trying to cast the love spell on the dead person, but you're trying to involve the dead person in the spell. And the ousia brings the dead person into the spell, and then your words and your other actions signify that they're not the object of the love spell, but they're just there to sort of help you with the whole process. At one point in the prayer it says, quote, "Send this daimon, from whose body I hold this remnant in my hands, to her," you write her name, the object of your desire, "at midnight hours." So right, send this daimon. A daimon, for the purposes of this video, a daimon is like a supernatural spirit figure. It's meant to be the spirit of the dead person. And so you're holding the ousia of that dead person. And as I said before, the things that you're supposed to recite, send this daimon to so-and-so's house. You're saying, okay, I have the ousia, I'm making sure that this daimon is involved, and with my words, I'm telling the daimon what to do. So this spell is actually printed not just in the collection of Greek magical papyri, but also in Gager's book on curse tablets, which I've talked about before, and which I'll link in the description below as well. It seems like this spell was very popular, and there are a number of curse tablets that follow this pattern. So here's one from Gager that was found in Egypt. And just understand that Betts translates ousia as magical material, but Gager translates it as stuff. So when I say stuff, that's the word ousia in Greek. So this is the first line of this curse tablet that was found in Egypt that follows the same formula as the spell we just talked about from the Greek magical papyri. It says, "Let Matrona, to whom Tagene gave birth, whose stuff you have, including the hairs of her head, love Theodorus, to whom Tychosus gave birth." So this curse tablet is great, because not only do we get the word for taglock, ousia, but we also get what the taglock is. It's a lock of her hair, which, as I said, is some of the most potent taglock magic you can have. We also get the name of the object or the target of the spell and her mother. And we also get the name of the person that she's supposed to fall in love with, and also a matronymic for that person as well. So all in all, a really, really clear example of how this magic would have worked. Now, what is really, really cool to me is that we actually have some archaeological evidence of ousia that is preserved from the ancient world. The reason I'm so excited about this is because this is not a given, right? Things like hair and whatever sort of bodily fluids and fingernails, these things degrade over time. They are not often preserved in the archaeological record. Even things like fabric, so if you had a person's shirt or something, that would not necessarily survive into the modern age. But there are a few examples of cases where this does happen, and this brings me great joy. So there's this curse tablet that was found in a well in the Athenian Agora that's published by D.R. Jordan. I'll link the study down below. And this curse tablet actually has some hair preserved inside of it. The curse tablet is rolled up and the hair is inside the rolled up tablet. And actually in the article, Jordan points out that some of the text of the curse is actually damaged because the hair over time made imprints onto the metal, which blows my mind. I love this. I just recently discovered this and it's like rocking my world. The reason that the hair is preserved is because the cursed tablet was deposited inside a well, and organic material like hair and fibers and plant matter, for example, these things survive better in extremely wet, extremely dry, extremely cold, or extremely hot environments. So inside a well is a pretty good place to find some hair, and they did inside a curse tablet, acting as a taglock on the object of the spell. So freaking cool. So just a note about context as we're talking about the curse tablet published by Jordan. Jordan suggests, and I think this is a good suggestion, that ousia are used most commonly in love spells, which I guess makes sense if you're trying to attract a person, or actually most of the curse tablets that Jordan has found and published have actually been trying to break off a relationship between two people, maybe some kind of love triangle situation going on there. So I guess it doesn't surprise me so much that you see a lot of ousia or taglocks being used in a love magic context. But I guess I'm just surprised that there aren't more taglocks being used in spells that are not love spells but are still directed at another person. So in legal contexts or in competitive context, business context, things like that. I'm just surprised to not find taglocks being used all that often in those contexts. So if anybody has any thoughts about that, let me know. I'd be curious to hear what other people think about that. I'm not sure myself. So I want to end with a literary reference that I came across while I was reading through Jordan's work. It comes from Lucian, who writes in Greek, although he's based in Syria, living around the 2nd century. Most of Lucian's work is comical or satirical, including a series of dialogues that is often referred to or titled Dialogues of the Courtesans, and this is where this reference to a taglock comes in. A woman by the name of Melita is trying to get her man back after he left her, and she's complaining about the situation to her friend Bacchus. Bacchus says that a similar thing happened to her, but she rectified the situation by consulting with a witch and having the witch perform a love spell to get her man back, and it apparently worked. So Bacchus tells her all of the things that she will need to bring to the witch in order for the witch to perform the spell, and one of them is ousia. So she says, I'll read you a little bit of it, and there will need to be something of the man himself, such as clothing or boots or little bits of hair or some such thing. Melita says that she actually has the guy's shoes still at her house because he left them, so she runs back to the house to grab them, and off they go to see the witch, and that's where the dialogue ends. This is a really straightforward reference to a taglock. You have two women talking about what it will take to perform a love spell on the man, and the need for something to tell the spell where to go, and it can be his personal belongings, or hair is mentioned again specifically in this context, so that's a good indication that hair was one of the most popular forms, and you'll need to bring those to the witch so that the witch can perform the spell. I wish we had the spell, I wish we knew which one she was using. Is it the bat eyes one, or is it the Ares holding a sword and then the other woman, whatever it is. And this is certainly fictional, by the way. This definitely didn't happen, but it's sort of like an indication of what people would have been like and what people would have done and how they would have acted. So it's still a good way to tell what the magical situation was at the time. And so there you have it. Taglocks have been used in magic since antiquity. In the ancient Mediterranean, they pop up a lot under the name ousia. Most often, it's something that has the person's DNA, hair, fingernails, whatever sort of bodily fluids you can get your hands on, but personal effects work just as well. Clothing, shoes, hair brushes. Taglocks are just one part of the larger picture. As you can see in all of the examples that I gave you today, the ousia are just one component of a larger spell that includes other objects, whether they are animal parts or pieces of clay or wax, lead tablets to write on, magical symbols a lot of the time, written spells, spoken spells, chanted things. All of these things come together to create the spell, and taglocks are just one part of that. That's true in modern witchcraft as well. Like I said, taglocks are to be included in a spell that has other items in it. The form and content of the spell will vary from practitioner to practitioner, and it will depend on the situation, the style of magic that they're performing, the intended outcome, and really what they can get their hands on in terms of the ousia of the target, right? It's a lot harder to get ousia of someone that doesn't want you to have it, for example. So all of these things will shape the spell into its own unique thing, but the way that taglocks works is the same in each case. It basically just tells the spell where to go. So that's all I have for taglocks today. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, you can let me know by leaving a thumbs up down below. And if you like this kind of content, you can go ahead and subscribe. I try to post videos like this almost every week about belief in the ancient world, magic, religion, mythology, folklore, from antiquity, all that good stuff. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you, and I will see you in the next video.